Welcome in D&D and Warhammer fans. This is a full 12 level spec for a cunning vampire queen necromancer, aka Neferata the Death Queen build, which will cause fear through the use of spells and her near endless undead horde. Definitely give this build a go for those of you who are either really into commanding their own personal army of undead legions, playing a very thematic Halloween build, or specifically for the Warhammer Fantasy fans and the Total War Warhammer fans out there, role-playing as Neferata, one of the more powerful vampire legendary lords. Well, she definitely should be a legendary lord in the Total War Warhammer game, and hopefully they'll add her as a DLC character sometime in the near future. But that aside, she is one of the most powerful undead spellcasters, using seduction and also pitting allies and enemies against one another, essentially being a puppet master. One thing I will note about this build is that I am using several mods to really just both enhance the thematic role-playing build, but also to truly optimize it for combat. And yes, I will admit, some of these mods are very overpowered, but I will mention this later on in the video that this is all optional, really. It's still pretty good for vanilla game purposes, but if you really want to go all out as a necromancer, definitely give these mods a shot. And one of these mods that I am including in this build is called the 5th edition spell mod, which you can find on the Baldur's Nexus mod. And to quote the author, this mod is one of the many that serves to add an additional selection of spells, from 1st level spells up to 9th level for all classes and their spell list, including Spell Sniper, Ritual Caster spell lists, etc., and also adding additional spells from the D&D 5e Tasha's Cauldron of Everything source material. And honestly, I really love this mod. I find it essential for most, if not all, of my Baldur's Gate playthroughs, just from the sheer quantity of spells, cantrips, that really it changes up character build ideas and also just adds a whole bunch of replayability to the game. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but personally for me, that just adds a whole bunch of new fun to the game too. There's a mod I also found on the Nexus that I think really enhances this build further. It is well, actually not just slightly overpowered, it definitely gets overpowered in later levels too. It's called Animate Dead++, and it really overhauls the entire Animate Dead spell, plus specifically the minions themselves. Some of the changes are removing the most limits of summons, as many undead spell slots allow, but also being able to reanimate the dead anywhere on the ground without the need of actually having a corpse in front of you. The spell overhaul also adds new minions like melee skeletons to really give a little bit more variety to your undead army, as well as allowing you to summon undead wizards for more spell firepower. Is the mod overpowered? It absolutely is, but if you think this is a mod that you will have fun with, plus also in your personal headcanon, it fits the lore, or it's what necromancers should feel like, adhering to the fact that for a lot of D&D campaigns, the big bad is like a necromancer with a lot of minions throwing the DM throws at your party, and maybe you want to know what that feels like playing as the big bad. Definitely give this mod a shot and a go for your necromancer build. Also a mod that was recommended to me by a friend on YouTube, and the previous build video I had, Alex Durev, I hope I pronounced that right, my friend, is the Dread Overlord Warlock subclass. That's also from the Baldur's Gate Nexus mod. The subclass has a major focus on necromancy spells and helps you manipulate the souls of the creatures or people you kill with necromantic damage to either raise them as undead minions, or taking control of their souls and using them as a protective sphere around your armor to increase AC slightly, although yes, this does stack and can definitely help you in later levels and parts of the story. This could be integrated with the build, but I think I want to make a separate video from this one This one will be focused more on kind of the traditional necromancer route, and for that one I think it's only right that I make a separate video dedicated mostly to that mod in particular, and especially creating kind of like a Witch King or Nazgul Ringwraith build for the Lord of the Rings fans out there. Definitely keep an eye out for this one though. I'll also add my mod list to the pinned comments as well as the links to them, plus the Baldur's Gate 3 mod manager, which I highly recommend using to get everything working smoothly together. I'll briefly mention some of the other mods in my list, such as Fantastical Multiverse mod, which adds massive amounts of new races to choose from. You can't use the vanilla human race, but for this build, the race that I'm using from Fantastical Multiverse is the Dampier, which is essentially a half vampire. It's almost like you get to play as a Starion. Now, even though I'm playing with mods, like I mentioned before at the beginning, you can use this build primarily for vanilla Baldur's Gate 3 too. Like I said, I mainly add these mods for personal fun, and also I'm leaving them here as an option for all of you to try out. Now, back to the build. This build will be a full 12 level spec going into full detail on all aspects from the beginning, first few levels and spells, to later multi-classing endgame levels and feats in order to create the ultimate level of battlefield control. I should also note that some of the specific spells that I suggest through certain levels you don't necessarily have to follow to a T. In fact, I would love to hear some of your personal thoughts in the comments below on any changes that you would tweak around with this build for your personal playstyle or simple roleplay, and also even for all of the metagamers, the power gamers out there who say this is how to play a proper necromancer, because I genuinely love hearing those kinds of comments, and also hearing what everyone else has experienced from their personal playthroughs. And yeah, I am definitely a sucker for D&D and Warhammer lore if you think that a certain spell or cantrip fits the character or build better. Now, for the specific race that you'll choose for this build, it can be human for vanilla, unmodded Baldur's Gate 3 for that extra skill proficiency, but for a more specific character background, you can choose the lineage category with the sub-race being Dampier from the Fantastical Multiverse mod. In D&D 5th edition lore, Dampiers often arise from encounters with vampires, but all manner of macabre bargains could happen too, like necromancer influences, encounters with mysterious immortals might have transformed the character as well. And like I mentioned, we're basing this off the first vampire queen in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, Neferata, which translates to beautiful death. In ancient Nehecaron, she was a former queen of the lost ancient desert city of Lamia, first of the vampires, leader of the vampiric bloodline known as the Lamian Sisterhood. And just like her namesake, our Death Queen will use her necromantic powers to further her ambitions in the story and wreak absolute terror on the battlefield. Features of the Dampier include movement action called Spider Climb to traverse walls to better reposition yourself, get the drop on the enemy, or even as a method of retreating or evading your enemies too, essentially making it as difficult as possible for enemies to actually get to you. And side note, I kind of like the animation for this too. You're not necessarily crawling on all fours like the Ring Girl, but you're teleporting bat style too. It really just adds to the vampire lord vibe as well. You'll also get a vampire bite action, which, to completely be honest, you probably won't use too much, as you'll be sending forth your minions to do most of the dirty melee work, slowing down your enemies and just grinding them in a war of attrition. And we will see later on, it's probably not in your best interest to deliberately put yourself in melee combat. You don't really have the highest amount of health out of everyone, really. But you should also find yourself needing... If you do find yourself using the bite attack, you'll use a constitution modifier instead of strength for attack and damage rolls. while also gaining advantage on attacks should you be missing half or more of your health. It does fit the role of a cornered vicious animal or a vampire in general. Also, side note, this is just a minor thing too, but if you want to regain a little bit of health, there is an option with the vampire bite action to siphon health from your enemies too, although it is just a small amount. Other sub-race features include superior dark vision to hunt your enemies better in dimly lit dungeons, ancestral legacy, which allows you to gain proficiency in 2 skills, very generous indeed, and adds a whole lot of versatility too. And last but not least, deathless nature, meaning you don't have to breathe to live. It's a very situational feature, and honestly, feel free to let me know in the comments if there are specific scenarios in the game where this could be very handy, like poison gas rooms or poison breath attacks. I haven't really gotten through or completed the actual game, but I just really wanted to showcase this to all of you in the D&D and Baldur's Gate fandom. Plus, also, I do respect the mod author doing their best to keep true to the lore of the Dhampir. As for your starting cantrips, pick up Bone Chill as one of your go-to attack spells, which also prevents any sort of healing, and also prevents pesky enemy mages from thwarting your plans to finish off their barbarian or whatnot. Toll of the Dead is also a pretty good cantrip for starters too. It's a spell added in the 5th edition spell mod, which has the potential to have the same amount of damage as Necrotic Touch, but also it's a perfect follow-up attack to get rid of that escaping enemy. Specifically, if the enemy is already injured, instead of doing 1d8 damage, you have the potential to do more damage, up to 12 as well. Another cantrip you could have could be Sapping Strength to get your enemies to fall prone. It does sound useful, but it specifically says you need to be a Dunamancy wizard, which I was a little bit confused about, to be honest, on how to even class into that in the first place. But if not that one, the 3rd spot, I personally would choose Gust of Wind because it's also situational, but if you position yourself and the enemy just right near an edge, you could literally blow them off into oblivion, which it's a very fun way to cheese encounters, but I also learned from a friend too that, well, you can't really loot their body if you just kick them off the ledge. As for the starter spells, it is a little bit bare bones. You'll choose Cause Fear to gain better control over the battlefield, specifically to buy yourself more time, not worry about too many enemies, allowing you and the party to better concentrate your efforts and damage on one enemy instead. Charm Person could also be useful to buy you extra time to get those enemies to stop attacking you, and keeps them somewhat friendly for a while. Fun fact, both Charm Person and Cause Fear play really well into Neferata's character in the Warhammer universe, as the Lamian Sisterhood was known for more so manipulation and deception instead of directly taking on and battling their enemies like the Blood Dragon bloodline. False Life is also a good bread and butter spell to use, perfect to give you those temporary hit points and useful in the early game stages, and it's essentially serving as a safety cushion should you find enemies hitting you more often or outright targeting you on Tactician difficulty. Just out of curiosity, how many of you actually play on Tactician difficulty? Like, I genuinely do want to know, as I'm confident that this build could hold its own on Tactician difficulty, but just for showcasing purposes, I am playing on balanced difficulty, so not too difficult, but definitely want a little bit of challenge as well. Entanglement is also one of those spells to give you extra battlefield control, stopping enemies in their tracks, or even falling prone to give you and the party advantage on those attacks. You could definitely roleplay it as undead hands coming up from the ground to trap enemies before reaching their Vampire Queen. Sleep is also pretty useful as one of those control spells, which, like Cause Fear and Charm Person, are there to essentially buy you that extra time to set up and forget about those enemies and focus fire on the weaker ones. Last but not least, Magic Missile is a good all-rounder spell to have, as it never misses, and overall, pretty solid consistent damage. For the background, you will choose Noble to roleplay Neferata as that former queen of the ancient Nehekaran city of Lamia, and this gives you proficiency with both persuasion and history. For the rest of your skill proficiencies, you can choose whatever works best for you, my friends, or whatever you feel fits the meta of the game too. For showcasing purposes, I'm going with Arcana, History, Investigation, Perception, Deception, and Persuasion. Now, the crucial part of this build is the ability points optimization, with no surprise Intelligence being one of the more important ones, assigning your +2 into that ability to at least get it up to 16 so you can have more spells available to you. And while Intelligence is going to be the ability you dump most of your points into, you will be taking points away from Strength, as really you shouldn't be relying too much on that ability at all for most of your playthrough. Like I said, you have a whole army of zombies to do that physical damage and heavy lifting for you. Charisma is also going to be one of the abilities you take points away from, even if it means losing points on Deception and Persuasion, as you will need the extra points to allocate into Dexterity and Constitution. It gets a little semi-tricky here, and really you could go either way with this, friends. You want to have the second highest abilities to be either Dexterity or Constitution. I say you can go either way just because you can choose between having a tiny bit more health with Constitution or having better initiative and AC with Dexterity. I decided to go with Dexterity so I can have that high initiative to go first in combat, plus also in combat I don't really have to worry about losing too much health if I don't get hit in the first place with high dex. I also still recommend throwing some points into Constitution to save yourself from being too squishy. Wisdom you can leave at 10, as Wisdom saving throws are still pretty important in the game. It is at 10, but better to have it at 10 rather than in the negative. Alright everyone, I know that was a lengthy starter and backstory for Neferata. We'll get into the specific level ups, especially with the multi-classing later on. If you've made it this far into the video, I would really appreciate you taking the time to listen in, and I would love to hear your feedback from all of you, whether there are some things you would like to change around for optimization, for your personal preferences, whether it be for role-playing style, or also for optimized metagaming combat. I do love talking build and character ideas from the D&D universe, so definitely come in with some of the critiques, changes, or overall improvements that you would make here, honestly. Now, specifically for the later level ups, at level 2, you will gain access to the actual Necromancy subclass, which reduces the cost of learning Necromancer spells from scrolls. My personal favorite feature here is Grim Harvest, allowing you to regain hit points for each creature you kill on your turn, and gaining even more health back if you kill them with a Necromancy spell. As for the spells, until you can summon the Undead, I would suggest choosing Find Familiar as an early game substitute, if not for outright beating your enemies, at least serving as a distraction. I do know there's a few mods on the Nexus Workshop that buffs or enhances the Find Familiar spell mod. I'll mention it later in the video too. You'll later gain Flock of Familiars, which just adds a whole bunch of familiars with lesser health, but hey, it's just essentially more bodies to distract your enemies with. Now, speaking of distractions, color spray is a very useful spell for blinding your enemies, hence buying you more time to run away to keep casting and blasting. You can mix and match your prepared spells, but my go-tos at this stage would be False Life, Magic Missile, Cause Fear, Find Familiar, and Color Spray. At level 3, you gain access to learn a whole new load of spells, which I recommend. Phantasmal Force, which deals damage for 10 turns and can be paired well with environmental effects for even more damage. Side note, I am curious of trying this out with the Everburn Blade being used by Lae'zel or Karlach, and hope to potentially time it right so that Phantasmal Force takes on burning damage alongside normal damage when used with Lae'zel or Karlach's use of the Everburn Blade. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Flock of Familiars is a variation on the Find Familiar spell. It's from the 5th edition spell mod and summons 3 familiars to help you in battle. Frankly, you will replace Find Familiar with this spell, as the more the merrier. And like the vampire counts from Total War Warhammer, use them to overrun and swarm your enemy, and essentially grind them down to a pulp by having too many bodies for them to take out or damage. I would also personally replace Color Spray with Phantasmal Force, because even though color Spray is useful in making a getaway, sometimes it's better to just outright damage and kill off an enemy than it is to prolong and run and escape. At level 4, you gain an extra cantrip, more spells, and also a feat to choose as well. The cantrip doesn't really matter too much. I would suggest using Gust, as I generally find it satisfying and funny to push enemies off cliffs to cheese battles. It does suck not having pickpocket or looting them though. Blindness is also a good spell to pick up at this stage. Unlike Color Spray, it has a stronger range, albeit you can only blind one person at a time, and you could definitely add it to the list, honestly. Hold Person is also incredibly good as a control spell to immobilize an enemy, especially with attacks against them. For the feat, you will pick Ability Improvement, immediately head over to Intelligence and bump it up to 18, or essentially as high as possible if you had different specs from the beginning as well. Like I said in the earlier part of the video, your spells and spell slots depend on it, and you will want to have as many available to unleash on the battlefield. At level 5, we have what you have been waiting for, friends, the Animate Dead spell for you to raise your undead servants to do your bidding. Now, bear in mind that just because you now have a flock of familiars and Animate Dead doesn't necessarily mean you have a full-fledged army, although, actually speaking now, with the Animate Dead ++, it definitely adds to your, or really just buffs your Animate Dead, like, by tenfold, really. Not really giving you a lot of limits on how many times you could use the spell, or like how many, well, you're essentially just limited by the spell level of how much you can summon. Let's say that enemies do somehow make it past your starter zombie minions and familiars. Using Vampiric Touch will siphon hit points over to you. And also, this is a spell that really fits Neferata's character incredibly well. Go ahead and add both of these to your repertoire of prepared spells, with my personal list in the battle being False Life, Magic Missile, Cause Fear, Flock of Familiars, Phantasmal Force, Vampiric Touch, Blindness, Animate Dead, and Hold Person. Now once you reach level 6, things start to branch away from the traditional Necromancer for a while. At this level, add the class Druid, and even though this class relies more on wisdom than intelligence, you will see why as we level up in Druid. Hint, yes, this does have something to do with more zombies. The cantrips and spells don't matter at an insane amount here, just because really choose whatever you want at this point. I chose Druid Craft as gaining an advantage on intimidation, fits the dominating presence that is Neferata, and also Thorn Whip could potentially come in handy pulling enemies away from their friends who would protect them, and also just give you a little bit more battlefield control. Prepared spells, like I said at this stage, doesn't matter too much. I decided to choose Speak with Animals, as I really would like to talk to that one mysterious cow in the Druid Grove. You do need to have Speak with Animals to actually interact and further the quest line though, but that's definitely a video we can talk about for another time. At Druid level 2, you will have access to different subclasses. I recommend Circle of Spores. A lot of you in my previous comments from past videos and also from my Necromancer Short said that Circle of Spores Druid is incredibly useful to really get into playing as a Necromancer. And later down the track, as you level up, you'll see spells at this stage. It's not too much of a big deal what you choose, but I would go ahead and keep Speak with Animals while picking up Earth Tremor to potentially cause enemies to fall over, yet again fitting in with the battlefield control and also helping out your units in battle too. Now the next level brings in more optimized spells, which include Summon Beast, allowing you to bring forth new allies from the air and land, yet again adding more souls to your army, and really yet again just drowning all enemies in a sea of bodies, which definitely sounds a little bit disturbing and overwhelming too, figuratively and literally. Like I said, this is all just for my personal playstyle. If you want to get Wither and Bloom, feel free to replace any of the prepared spells, genuinely. Spells and cantrips for Druid level 4, again, no big deal what you pick. I personally decided to get Primal Savagery to fit with a feral vampire and roleplay it that way. But then again, Frostbite could also play well into that too. I know for some of the Skyrim and Elder Scrolls players out there, vampires do tend to use a lot of frost magic, and there is one spell combination or spell and cantrip combination I would find hilarious, as Spike Growth and Gust of Wind could potentially create an environmental trap with enemies being slowed by Spike Growth, but also with Gust of Wind pushing them back in to that Spike Growth should they walk out of it. It's essentially like a very vicious toxic cycle. As for the feat, I decided to go with ability improvement to fully cap out intelligence at 20, and it pays off greatly when we respec back into Wizard. Level 5 isn't the most eventful either, just honestly pick any spell that you want really to hold you over until we get to the best part of the build, which would be level 6 of Druid. I know the levels in Druid so far are not super consequential or don't matter as much, but once we actually get to this specific Druid level, we get an action that I'm looking forward to as a Spore Druid. Will definitely be worth it in the long run. Level 6 is where you get the Fungal Infestation to summon up to 4 fungal zombies, adding a whole boatload of minions to swarm and overwhelm your enemy. This does go back to the main strategy, which, yes, absolute damage output may not be a total powerhouse. It instead grinds down your enemies with a war of attrition and provides a whole bunch of new meat shields and pawns for enemies to dish their attacks and damage on instead of you and the rest of the party. And essentially, a lot of these minions too, they have a pretty decent or a high amount of health too, with Fortified Undead. Now, going back to level 6 of the Necromancer Wizard, this is also where you'll gain the extra summon to add even more bodies to your growing undead horde. And for thematic purposes, I really love the Flying Ghoul as my main minion. However, if you have a preferred minion like the Skeletal Archer for your specific playstyle, definitely go for it. It's mainly to fit the theme of Neferata having vampire-like minions like Varghulfs, which are essentially giant massive bats. Side note, those are some of my personal favorite units in the Total War Warhammer game. I recently started playing vampire counts, and they're arguably one of those beasts that have proven to be really good frontline destroyers, or just powering through the front lines and taking out range units as well. I also want to take this time to talk about and discuss with all of you some useful items that you would use for Necromancer builds. I have been told that the Necromancy of Thay book in the Blighted Village in Act 1 is incredibly useful. It can be read later on. I think it's in Act 2 or 3. Do you have to pass several wisdom saving throws? It's part of a side story, and honestly, side note, it's okay to save scum right before reading, just because I'm not sure how difficult it is. But after you pass those wisdom saving throws and have fully read the book, you gain the Dance Macabre spell. Sorry if I butchered that up a bit. This does allow you to permanently summon 4 ghouls once per short rest. The ghouls are not controlled by the player, but the AI uses them pretty competently in battle. I haven't gotten into this part of the story yet either, but another key item is Carry-On Mystic Staff. I hope I said that right too. It does allow you to spam Necromancer spells at will. I would love to hear in the comments from all of you, how useful or effective that you found this staff/magic item. Someone in my short video also suggested that to me. Like I said, haven't gotten to that part of the story, but eventually I do really want to utilize that with this build. And for the specific outfit, I'm just rocking this from the Basket Full of Equipment mod to fit Neferata's vampire look. But for power gamers and meta gamers out there, let me know in the comments what kind of specific gear or outfits would you suggest. And that's it for this build as of right now. It's definitely a viable build for vanilla Baldur's Gate, but also incredibly very overpowered with mods. I hope this gets you in the mood to play a Halloween-esque character, or to really suit your Necromancer Ultimate Undead Queen roleplay ideas too. And let me know in the comments your personal favorite builds. If you love talking shop about all things D&D and Baldur's Gate, I'd love to have you join us on the next adventure, friends, and be sure to hit that like and follow button, and I'll save you a seat at the table.